Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Butterfly Effect podcast. Today we are doing our final analysis of the casting of Frank Stone, chapter 14, titled The Massacre of Geraint Manor, which sounds very ominous, and as you'll know, well, you'll have seen in my playthrough, but by the end of this analysis, certainly, for me at least, it proved to be very true. But obviously we're in the theatre, aren't we, mate? We're watching what's going down on the projector film, and Augustine comes in. It looks like Stan wants to try and escape, and we have established that he did have a deal with Augustine to... What I assume it to be, mate, is just to keep everybody busy while she was going off to fiddle with the film reels that she sort of stealthily took earlier on. I'm thinking that's what it was all about. But we do have a choice here, whether we accused Augustine or confronted Stan. So what did you do?
I accused Augustine, my theory being, well, we kind of already established what Stan's done. I don't think, I'm mad at the guy, but I don't think accusing him is going to do anything further. All I'm going to get is a, oh, sorry, or, yeah, well, it is what it is. The game's the game. So I just accused Augustine, just as a bit of a, I might die here. I might as well just do one more middle finger to you. And you know what? I'm kind of glad it did, because obviously, as we know, in my playthrough, I'm without Maddie. She died because I can't button mash. And it led to a bit of dialogue where Linda said something along the lines of, oh yeah, we're getting Maddie and we're going out of here or something. And then Augustine says, oh, that won't be possible. Maddie's dead. And you do get kind of a bit of emotion out of Linda, who is really sad by this news, because it's almost like, oh, she's lost Bonnie and now she's lost her daughter, in quick succession. Well, if we're thinking she memorized the film or whatever. So yeah, I don't know the relevance of the choice, but I think I'm happy with what I picked.
Yeah, I've got to admit, it's like you said a minute ago, mate. I'm not sure if there's any real significance in this choice. All I do know is that if you do go to confront Stan, you can punch him, or you can choose not to punch him, and then he just sort of scurries off a little bit. Obviously, he can't leave the room because the gates have come down. But I did pick the same as you. I'd choose to accuse Augustine, and all it really was a couple of the characters having a go at him, namely Maddie and Sam. And before we carry on, I've got to admit, obviously, there are 5 playable characters in this, if you are just taking them all as each character and not necessarily different timelines and things. But I was pretty happy with myself going into this. I was like, final chapter, 1 dead. I was thinking, come on, keep your focus, Jack, and this could be your best ever outing. But again, we'll see how that plays out. So we then start to see Frank Stone start to come through the screen. Very reminiscent of The Ring, if anyone's seen the horror film The Ring, where the woman comes out the television. And I think at this point, this is where that book becomes relevant that we found in chapter 12, whereby it needed maybe one more sacrifice in order for Frank Stone to be able to step into the 2024 realm. And we then see Stan get dragged, and he's been held up by Frank Stone. And we then get a QTE, mate. And I'm curious as to what you did here. So did you pass that QTE?
Yeah, I did, annoyingly. I would have rather have passed the one earlier. Because I'm sure, from what I've gathered with the comments, and, I believe you can confirm this, but I think someone might have to die here. And you look at the people in the room. You've got... For me, I had Chris, who's quite quirky. She's a good character. You have Sam, who's the Pearl of Wisdom, who, the hero in the prologue. You've got Linda, who's my fave. And then you have the wheeler dealer who betrayed us all with the man bun. And I would rather it was him, but nah, I just saw QTE. We got to save a character. I was at the end of the day, he's human. I think he's kind of on our team now because, it's us or the big monster who's just come through the screen. So yeah, I passed this one, mate. Before I progress to what happens next in my scene, did you save Stan here as well?
I did. And obviously I've played this because I've 100%ed the game now. I've played this scene many, many times. And one thing I've noticed about this QTE, it's incredibly easy to pass. So you was mentioning before of the spamming of the buttons with Maddie and the Switch, it was really difficult. This one was remarkably easy. I do think it's perhaps a topic for another video, so I won't necessarily go into it. But I know there have been like murmurings in the comments of people that are not happy with the fact that actually you have to fail the QTE in order to save a main character. Because obviously we're going to move on now. There is then a choice. If you pass the QTE, another character gets dragged, and for me it was Linda. And then we get a choice as Sam whether to sacrifice ourselves or to back away. So mate, what did you do?
Oh, okay. So mine was very different, actually. I don't know why it's different. Someone in the comments or yourself could explain if you do know the answer to this, mate. But after I saved Stan as Sam, it then got hold of Chris. So Chris in 2024 is getting pulled through the portal. And again, the QTE, it's not a choice, it's a QTE. So, like, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to pass the QTE, because it's not, a bit like you mentioned with Stan, it's not like you wouldn't know, you have to fail it. So I just was like, right, well, I'm going to click and save her. Again, I found it quite easy. Chris gets saved. And then it's Sam that, like, no choice, just I save two people, and then Sam's in front of Frank Stone and gets gobbled up. Really quite gruesome death. I feel like quite an underrated death where, like, his stomach opens up and pulls him through. And he died a hero's death. He saved two people. He put Frank Stone to sleep in, like, you know, the prologue. So it was kind of fitting that Frank Stone came back and then killed his, like, person who killed him originally. So I quite like the story arc of it. If I had to write it like a director, I would say that I would have written Sam off there, to be honest. So I quite like the way it went out. One thing I want to say before I pass it on to you is that later on, like, when Frank Stone comes out, you see Sam, like, his face in Frank Stone's body. And it's really morbid the way he says it hurts. And I don't know why, like, obviously this game's good. The thing I'm about to reference is not. But Jack, did it not remind you of a certain Doctor Who episode where...
Yes, I've got this written down. Yes.
Have you actually? Where Peter Kay is the green monster and the faces are trapped in him when they get, like, consumed. But yeah, so, in long story short, mate, I lost Sam here. But I just want to reiterate, all QTEs, I never got a choice like you just stated there.
Interesting. The whole absorber thing. Yeah, I've got a bit. It did pull me out for a split second because it made me laugh. But no, going back to that thing. So yeah, for me, was there a QTE? All I remember, I think Linda was about to get pulled in. I think I then got a choice: back away or sacrifice yourself. So I was like, okay, I'll sacrifice myself. And I was sort of hoping that the wording, again, you're doing the nice thing. Hopefully there'll be some QTEs to then get me out of it. It didn't occur. Sam then got eaten by Frank Stone, and then that's what allowed Frank Stone to cross into the realm. And I really like this introduction of Frank Stone in the 2024. The music's dramatic. I mean, he just looks really cool, doesn't he? With like all the spikes, the missing jaw, the really ghoulish dead eyes. You've got the stomach that can open up, and he can like pull the axe from out within himself as well. And there's just little details here I like. So like when Augustine backs away and like her eyes for a split second go like that demonic red, which had me for a sec. I was thinking, wait, so is Augustine not human then? So that was sort of something I pondered. No, it was a really, really cool intro. And I'll say this now before I forget. This ending, miles better than The Quarry. And actually looking back at my blind playthrough, a lot happens, but I actually... in terms of the length of the chapter, it didn't go on as long as it could have done. And I still would say that it wasn't vanilla. This was miles better than the ending in The Quarry, mate.
Yeah, big time. And you mentioned the kind of the art of the theme. You've got Sam's face, like, going out of Frank Stone. You have, like, the characters trying to escape. And you mentioned the theme of it all, like the look of Frank Stone be cool. The other thing I want to put, props off to is the red lighting effect that they have going on. It just looks so ominous. I love, like, the techniques, how, like, Frank Stone is just his, like, kind of blue demonic self, and then he's in a red room. So the contrast is really cool. And the red room's just really fitting with the whole Dead by Daylight thing as well. And, like, if you're not a DBD fan, you can almost link it back to Maddie's first chapter where she has the red glow following her, like, as she, like, leaves, that nightmare sequence. So yeah, no, I was a really big fan, and I agree. Miles better than the Quarry's ending.
But one more thing before we progress, mate. A little bit of branching for you, in case you didn't know. It comes back to that pendant that we found in chapter 12. So remind me, who did you give the pendant to? Was it Chris?
I gave the pendant to Chris. Yeah.
Okay. So obviously this didn't happen in my blind playthrough because I kept it as Maddie, right? But I think there was obviously other prerequisites to this particular bit of branching that I didn't do in my blind playthrough, but I have done it since. But Maddie can get hypnotized in this sequence. So if you've passed the QTE to save Stan when Frank Stone's holding him up, Augustine can then hypnotize Maddie and start to walk her towards Frank Stone. And you then get a choice. I think it's as Sam, but it's only if Sam has the gun. And you can then choose to shoot at Frank Stone or shoot at Maddie. If you shoot at Maddie, you do get an achievement, but he doesn't like fatally kill her, but shooting her like snaps her out of like the hypnotizing and whatnot by Augustine. So there's like a little bit of branching for you there that you wouldn't have seen, because obviously you had Maddie killed earlier on in like the sarcophagus room.
Yeah, and I also had Linda take the gun, so it's cool to know what happens as a consequence if you remove it from Sam.
Yeah, honestly, like this final scene, it's very, very impressive with the branching. I mean, I imagine you've seen it with the cutting room floor, but the certain choices that you've made in the build up to this scene, even within the scene, really, really impressive. And it's another reason why I just think it's just miles better than The Quarry, to be honest. But we're going to move on, mate. So obviously Frank Stone is out. Everybody's shitting a brick, trying to escape. Speaking for myself, obviously we saved Stan, so I imagine you literally got the exact same instance as me here. He's at the gate. Frank Stone approaches him and just axes him straight in the head. Was it the same for you?
Yeah, it was quite a very gory death. But you know, I like it, and I was just sat there thinking like, oh wait, I saved him. So like, you know, I wouldn't say I felt robbed that I saved him for him to die like a minute later, but he was the sleazy guy who betrayed us. Really nice to see him get his comeuppance. It's, you know, it's one of those bittersweet ones where, you know, if it's any of the other characters, you're like, oh no, they died. But with Stan, I was like, yeah, have it, mate. But one thing I want to like, you know, this is what we do on the channel, mate. We're nitpickers. We're horrible people. We're very sorry, Supermassive Games and Behaviour. I wasn't a fan of the fact all three went to different doors to try and open it, because I was thinking surely strength would be a factor. You know, I know you want to try different doors, but like get like 2 or 3 people on the same door, you know. But then like the moment like Chris and Linda open their doors at the same time, Stan like turns around and sees they're not there. It's like just running through their door, but he's still trying the closed door. And I'm like, you know what, mate? You deserve that death. You're fucking dumb.
I did think this. I wish I thought this literally 2 minutes earlier, because as Frank Stone was approaching him, I was thinking, he's an NPC. It doesn't matter. Which then made me think, well, why the frick did I then do the QTE literally moments before? But no, you are right. And there's 2 other videos, really like little discussion videos that could come off of this. One being, is the choice design, the QTE design, the object that, you know, the objects that you can find in this, was it fair to the player? I think there's perhaps talking points there. Again, I've seen some comments that are in sort of either end of that particular debate. Also, the fact of determinant characters as well, because he is a character that, well, he can have 3 deaths, can't he? He can have the one in the room where he gets cut in half, he can get eaten by Frank Stone, and he can get an axe to the head, which in itself is a good thing. But at the same time, you'd like to think potentially, you know, people out there, that Stan could survive the whole thing. But again, we'll keep that to another video. So as for me, at this point, obviously Sam was gone. I'd lost Harme. Chris was back in the 1980s. Stan was gone. So all I had left was Maddie and Linda. Now they're running together. They're in a corridor and they go into this room to fix the generator, which I then did. I'll pause there. Is there any differences for you, mate, apart from the fact that it's not Maddie?
Nah, just that Maddie is Chris for me, so yeah.
Oh right, okay. So it's fun. Oh right, so it's Linda and Chris that team up in that section then.
It is, yes.
Oh, okay, because I've not seen that. So, right, so okay, so yeah, you fix the generator. Of course, if you don't fix the generator, Linda can die here. She just gets axed to the neck, and then Chris or Maddie then have to go and run through the mansion. But because I fixed the generator, I then had a scene where you go into the corridor, you clearly go into the elevator, and then Frank Stone barges through the wall. Maddie's knocked out. And I then have a choice. Do I help Maddie or do I go to the elevator? Now, my logic for me, because of the Harmay choice, where I tried to help and I died, the Sam choice, I tried to help and I died, I thought, fuck it, I'm not going to help Maddie, because if I do, I'm going to get killed, right? So I went straight to the elevator. And then I thought it was going well. She shuts the gate. Next thing you know, Frank Stone opens the gate and decapitates her. So Linda is now dead. And this is one of the choices when we do that discussion video that I'm going to bring up. Like, our coin toss choice is a good thing because it's really odd. You've almost got to guess what the following cut scene's going to be, because if you go to help Maddie, all she does is look at Frank Stone and go, oi, you know, stay away from her. And then he goes to attack you, and then next thing you know, like, whoever it is inside him, whether it's Stan or Sam, then sort of causes a ruckus, and then that sort of buys you enough time. Which I'm not sure how I feel about as like a fairness thing, but what are your takes on it, mate? What happened for you?
Mate, super interesting. And yeah, it sucks there, because like you say with the Harmay choice, it's like you've had two coin tosses and you've got both wrong. And there's almost like no way of knowing like what the right answer would be. There's almost no logic you can use there. So yeah, that is really unfortunate. And it's really cool to see. The other thing I've got to comment on though is that you would think, right, if you was to hear about my playthrough, that Chris would just take Maddie's place, right? And it would be like Man and Medan, where the characters just slot into where the dead ones would be. It wasn't like that at all. Chris does something completely different in this chapter. So that's just so interesting. So I always just had a solo Linda in this hallway. So I never got a choice like that. Mine was just, you go to the elevator, do you want to go down or up?
But what I want to know, mate, is so what happens with Chris then? So like Chris is with you when you fix the generator. So Linda goes to the elevator by herself, and then Chris just runs off.
Chris comes into this a little bit later, actually. So I'll pause on her because we're still with Linda, because you get the choice of you get to the elevator and you can go down or up. And you know, like Frank Stone's approaching because there's no distractions for him, you know. So I just was like, right, down or up. I picked down because I was just assuming we're probably on the near top floor. I need to escape this building, so down makes sense to me. And I just before I go, mate, have you seen what happens if you go down or up?
I remember what happens if you go one of the directions. You can run into Augustine again. Is that what happened with you?
Yeah, so I went down and I went to the big green room that we can't pronounce. Guys, in the comments, if you know what happens if you go up, please tell me, because I'm really curious. But I went down and then I went back in that green room and I was gutted. I was like, no, I wanted to go out the front door. Why am I in this room again? No. And then like Augustine just stood there, and then she, you know, has this whole spiel about, oh, it's over. Like, I've done what I had to do. And and if you remember, mate, I've got a gun with Linda. And then it comes and it's like, oh, do you want to shoot Augustine or not? And I was thinking, oh, what do I do? I was thinking, like you say, with the red eyes, she's potentially supernatural. I'm thinking, like, if I shoot her, is it going to backfire? Is there going to be something here, like, actually the aggression? It wants to, like, dob you into the aggressive approach. But I kind of thought to myself, what would Linda do? She's been dragged out into the pits of the UK, into this manor where, you know, she's been conned. A lot of friends around her have died. There's a monster in the room. This lady has caused it. So yeah, I shot Augustine on my blind playthrough, mate, which I was pretty happy. An achievement pop, so I guess it's quite a unique variation to get. So yeah, Augustine, I just was like, yeah, fuck you. I'm not having you have a happy ending. We might all die here, but at least you will as well. So yeah, Augustine gets shot here, mate.
Brilliant, because for a split second there, I thought you was going to talk yourself out of not shooting. And I was like, oh mate, like there's an achievement there, like waiting for you. Because
I wonder what happens
case,
if you don't shoot her, because I had quite a unique ending where she's shot as well. So yeah, like unless you can fill me in, if not, guys in the comments, what happens if you don't shoot Augustine?
I know what happens I don't know what happens if you don't shoot, because I don't think I've played that. But you can actually go down there as Maddie as well. And again, like Augustine tries to talk you round. She's like, oh, I'll stop the trauma, I'll stop the pain and whatnot. And she can then, if you have the pendant, hypnotise you to follow her. If you don't have the pendant, you can still trust her and follow her, and in which case she then betrays you. Or you can just tell her to go fuck herself and then you go back in the elevator. But to answer your earlier question, mate, I think I know what happens if you go up. And I do think you made the right decision, because you basically got a bonus scene there with Augustine. But you would have always ended up going up anyway, because what happens if you go up is you've then got like the chase scene through like the mansion, which I'm assuming you got.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
That's
really so interesting though, mate, because like there's so much variety here based on who is there and whether you have a gun or not. So yeah, no, the more you speak about like filling in the gaps for me, the more I'm impressed with this game.
Yeah, and honestly, it's why I literally made that point at the start. Why I feel just the ending itself, I feel like is miles better than the Quarry in terms of like the jeopardy. You're not just shooting something in the back and then going, hurrah, we're done. Do you know what I mean? There's a bit more at play and there's lots of branching as well. So for me, mate, this is where I guess the ending starts to come in for me. So I'll quickly get that out of the way. So Augustine then walks out. You can see the entity in the sky, which, by the way, is such a beautiful shot. Like, that could easily be like a screensaver on like a laptop or something like that. I absolutely love that shot. Again, probably the best in the game, maybe at least very close. And she's selling, what she's done to the entity, right? Frank Stone has got Maddie on his shoulders for me. And he then hooks Maddie on like one of the the branch things that are coming out of the floor. And there's this really nice touch that you don't always get, but because that happened to Bonnie, like Augustine has this line for Maddie where she says it's not often that a mother and daughter have the same fate. So like Maddie then dies as well. She then gets sacrificed to the entity, and I'm just sat there like, holy shit, have I just managed to kill everyone off in this game? And then after that, Augustine gets betrayed as well by Frank Stone. And that's pretty much that, apart from you then have this mini sequence where you get to play as Frank Stone. And you're only walking like a few feet towards the campfire, but you then get the usual spiel of like, oh, if there's any survivors, it's like a trial and stuff. And I'm sure we'll get to that because you'll be able to explain the significance of it from a Dead by Daylight perspective. And then there's the post-credit sequence, which we'll get to as well. But that's basically a wrap for me, mate. So I was pretty stunned at like, it really was a massacre. I basically lost everyone but Chris, who was back in the 1980s. So hit me. What was your version of the events?
Yeah, so for me, lad, I mean, before I get to this Augustine scene that you mentioned where, she comes outside, I will just quickly resume with what happens with Chris. So I don't know if you've seen this, but Chris doesn't do what Maddie does. She's not in the hallway. She actually ends up back in the theatre room. And yeah. I was thinking this because when I saw Frank Stone going and the doors were shut, I'm thinking like, oh, well, there's a portal behind. You've got a dash behind Frank Stone. So Chris has this choice. Do you try to go back to the 1980s or do you stay? Now, I was thinking, well, yeah, there's a killer in this realm and she belongs in the 80s. So I was like, yeah, I think it's time to get her home. So no. Yeah. And obviously, yeah, mate, she's got the pendant and I completely dismissed this thing. I think maybe, yeah, because I did it in a few sit-throughs, but I also completely forgot about that clue. So yeah, she gets fried to a crisp at the theatre room, mate. Kind of in a similar fate to Maddie, to be honest. So yeah, really brutal. I lost Chris here, but you know what, mate? That's my blind playthrough. It's my decision. You know, bit me on the bum. We move on. But I'd love to know what happens if she stays in 2024, and even what happens if she doesn't have the pendant and she does get back to 1980s that late. Like, what relevance she plays. So yeah, but we go to Augustine, and yeah, obviously Maddie's dead, so they have nothing to sacrifice. I just want to say, I had no idea you could play as Frank Stone. That is something I can't wait to try. The minute, I get through this patch, I think, yeah, I'm going to give that a whirl, mate. But you know what? Like, I've always said it, Augustine, like, she's just such a compelling villain to me. I feel she's completely, underrated, unsung, her performance, her line delivery. I quite like the dynamic of having, a fairly weak nemesis with, kind of like a big henchman. You see it from Tomorrow Never Dies with Stamper and Carver, don't you? I feel like it is a dynamic that just works, and I think I don't feel bad for Augustine. She's caused this, but there was a little element in me that's she's served her whole life serving this entity for her creation to kill her. Like you mentioned, it's very Frankenstein, and I don't know, it's just really brutal to see that her whole life she's oh, give me my reward, and then she just gets killed by Frank Stone. And that whole Spike thing, mate, is straight up from Dead by Daylight again. Basically, if you stay in the map too long and you don't get out in time, that entity will kill you that way, where it will just spike you from the floor. So very much a Dead by Daylight death, which was really welcomed, really epic to see. So yeah, anything to comment on with my things there with Chris and Augustine?
Oh, 100%. With Augustine, I'm in complete agreement. She's so poised, isn't she? Like the way she speaks, and this really helps. This is why the facial animations are so important. It helps sell the character. Interesting as well how I know she's not a narrator in the traditional sense, like your Dr. Hills and your Elizas and your curators, but really cool how actually there wasn't necessarily a twist. We knew that she was a baddie from the get-go, but she still had that aura of menace about her, and just she seemed one step ahead of everyone, and I think she is a really solid character. So on that point, I completely agree. As far as Chris, mate, I do have stuff to tell you. So basically, two things. You had the pendant, right?
I did.
And you walked back and then you died. So you got one version of events. There is another version. I haven't played it, but I have seen it. You know, back at the Curiosity Shop, if you try to haggle for the camera, which obviously we didn't, but you saying it was a social experiment, right? If you try and do that, Augustine or the shopkeeper turns around and says, I can't take the price any further down, but I can give you this mirror. And if you then, as Chris, have that mirror, if she has the mirror or the pendant and she goes through the screen, she'll get the same outcome that you just did. If she has neither of the two, which, to be fair, mate, if you didn't have the pendant, I'd argue you was so close to the best ending in a way.
Okay.
Because if Chris goes through the screen without those two items, she then appears back at the scene where they're making the film, where Harmey's strapped to the chair.
Oh, I've seen this on YouTube. I've not looked at it, but I've seen a little video preview where she appears out a portal behind the strapped Jaime.
That's it. So basically, the implication being, and why many people see that as the best ending, is that she's made it back to that timeline to then tell herself not to carry on making the movie, because that then breaks the cycle. If you get what I mean?
Yeah, so are there two Chris's in a room then?
So yeah, there's two Chris's in a room. They don't say anything. They're obviously looking at her stunned. But obviously the implication is that if she goes back and tells herself not to make the film, there's then no film for Frank Stone to come out of in 2024, and thereby that then breaks the loop. So that is why it's then looked upon as the best ending. So you was damn close to it, mate. If you literally gave the pendant to Stan, then you would have got that ending.
The best ending then, or for the best game, is to keep Chris in 2024 and then bring her back to 1980s late then.
Arguably, yeah, because obviously there is the campfire thing as well. Like, you've got the ending where all of the survivors make it to the campfire, but is it the best ending? Because ultimately they're then trapped in this loop, right? So, and that is obviously the alternative. If you don't go through the screen, Chris ends up at the campfire. So that was the other option for you. But yeah, that sort of cleared that up for you, mate? I hope. Is there anything else that goes down with Linda? Like, did you have the chase sequence in the mansion?
I did, yeah. I had the chase sequence, nailed all the QTEs. And yeah, obviously, as you can tell, mate, all my characters died, apart from Linda, who's still running. So in a nutshell, lad, my blind playthrough was Linda sole survivor with the campfire ending. Before I continue, did you say that all of your characters died in 2024?
Well, yes, but this is where it gets a little bit confusing, because for me, Chris survived, like, in the 1980s. This is what I don't get, is that I sent Chris back earlier on in the game, right? And then in chapter 13, she didn't get killed by Frank Stone because I saved everybody in that sequence, down in the storm drain. But that's the last you see of Chris. But then when I looked at the cutting room floor, it said no survivors. But I was like, well, hang on a minute, but Chris didn't get killed. So I don't know if that's a game error or if I'm missing something. Again, go to the comments if you could help clear me up on that one, because that's partly one of the reasons why I was confused. I don't know if a survivor only registers if they're in the 2024 timeline. But yeah, it's something that puzzled me, I've got to say. So as far as I look at it, I also had a solo survivor in Chris, but she was in the 1980s. But I don't know, mate.
Oh, fair. Wait, so did you get the campfire ending with Chris, but from the 1980s?
No. So the only thing I got is where, because nobody was at the campfire, for me, you get to quickly play as Frank Stone. You only walk a few feet forward. You go to the campfire, nobody's there. And then she does the spiel about, people, they'll be stuck in a loop and this and that, which, to be fair, I was hoping that you might be able to explain, being that it could be a right thing.
Oh, okay, here we go then. So, with Linda runs, and then clearly she's in this dream sequence. It feels very Twin Peaksy. It feels very Life is Strange season 1 episode 5, End of Twin Mirror, whatever you want to call it, where she's going down this dark path. And have you seen it where she's seeing sort of the different sort of shops where you've got the 1980s characters talking? Yeah, so I had that, and obviously Chris, dying in 2024. I know she can be in those flashbacks. She wasn't for me. So I only had Linda, Robert, and Sam. And the three of them agreed to split the films up, which was really cool to see, because it makes sense of there was 3 films and then 3 films were brought back. One thing I want clarity on is what happens if Chris is in those scenes, because apparently that can happen. I might be wrong there, but I think I've had Chris can be. So I'm does the camera get split in 4, and does that mean you get a good ending because there's a 4th clip out there to get Frank Stone? I don't know. The other thing as well, though, is if they agreed to split this clip up into 3 parts, I get it that Maddie was I can make a penny for this. She's young, she's oblivious, she doesn't know the backstory. Stan's a wheeler dealer, he wants money, fair play. But I'm sat there thinking, why has Linda gone back to the manor? For me, she is the one who trapped Frank Stone in the camera. Why would she go back? And I know, near the start of the game, she kind of argues it, and then Augustine says, oh yeah, but I can take away pain for you. And I'm it's a bit dodgy that they've invited, and you've established that all 3 clips have been brought back. And you could probably suss at that point, well, they're trying to re-release Frank Stone, they know what's up here. So I was just really baffled, to see why Linda would bring it back. And I don't know if I've missed something, but before I progress, I'm wondering if you can fill that in for me.
I really can't. I can't. I
wonder if it's a plot hole then. I'm really wondering if that is a plot hole.
Potentially. I sent Chris back to the 1980s, right? So I'm pretty sure not that I did in my blind playthrough, but if, say, Linda did make it out, I would have had Chris in those flashback sequences in which case there would have been 4 characters: Robert, Sam, Linda, and Chris. So I imagine it always gets split up into 3. Linda takes one, obviously. Robert, his one gets taken by Stan, right? So the only other people that could have took it would have been Chris or who's the other character?
Sam.
Chris and Sam. So how does Maddie get hold of her bit of film then? Presumably through Bonnie, but how does Bonnie get the film? Do you know what I mean? For the timeline to work, for the 3 films to then get back to the 3 people at the start of the game, how does that 3rd one work? Is what I'm a little bit bored by as well.
It's a good question, so comments fire away, help us understand, because it's a beautiful game, but like we say, there are a lot more questions than answers, and I am kind of like, I've not really had the time to kind of like dig through the game and understand it all, so I am just a little baffled, and I'm really intrigued to know what happens there. But regardless though, mate, it's pretty cool because I have Linda walking through this eerie dream sequence, and then like it gets to the point where there's like a fork in the road, you can go left and squeeze through the gap, and it's like, oh, if you do that, the scene will end. So I went right, picked up my Trickster collectible, and then I saw through the gap Campfire. And as the Dead by Daylight fan I am, I knew exactly where this game was going and how it was ending. Because, like, obviously we're walking down this dark path, it's all eerie. Maddie did the same at the start, and she ended up in this big thing. Instead of a campfire, you had a TV, but I saw a campfire. Now, when you play Dead by Daylight, mate, the way the menu and the lobby works is that the survivors are sat around a campfire. Now, the beauty of Dead by Daylight is that the killer, like, is in the lobby with them, and the killer can see the survivors they're up against and what the survivors are. The survivors don't know what killer they're facing because the killer is, like, outside the campfire looking in the survivors. And that's the beauty of Dead by Daylight. There's like 30 plus, maybe more, like probably 50 at this point, honestly, killers. And the beauty of the game is that the survivors go into the match not knowing the killer they're going up against until they see them in the flesh or whatever. So, like, essentially, Linda, for me, basically became a part of the Dead by Daylight universe in the game. She's fallen into, like, the dream world. The fog has collected her. And now she's in the Dead by Daylight universe where she goes to the campfire. And the 3 survivors you see around are Dwight, Meg, and Claudette from the game. I clocked them a mile off. I knew it was them. They weren't saying anything because it's pretty much like a game lobby, you know, where you can't chat to the other survivors because they're like loading. Right. So she basically entered the Dead by Daylight menu, essentially. And I was like, okay, that is kind of cool, like, but I was also thinking maybe you have to be a Dead by Daylight fan to appreciate that, because I'm thinking, like, if Jack got this campfire scene, he's not going to know what the fuck that's about. So yeah, like, I kind of want your take on what you thought of that. But then, like, obviously, yeah, like, Augustine at the end narrates, and then I never played as Frank Stone, but I saw Frank Stone just approach and look on at the campfire, and it was just a mirror image of the Dead by Daylight menu. And this made me think, oh, okay, this game is basically one giant origin story for the next Dead by Daylight chapter, and I'm assuming we're going to get Frank Stone with potentially Linda, Chris, or Maddie, or whoever goes to the campfire, as a potential survivor in the game. So I just thought it was a bit like a really massively dressed up origin story for the next Dead by Daylight chapter. And that's the other thing. I quite like that, but does it cheapen the game that it's essentially lore origin for like another game? I don't think so. As a non-Dead by Daylight fan, maybe you would feel entitled to feel a bit robbed by that.
No, I don't mind, because the way I interpret it is that it was simply a dark ending, you know, whereby if you got to the campfire, it wasn't that you traditionally escaped per se, but it was that you was then going to be in this endless loop where you're going to be coming up against a killer and you've got to survive. That's how I took it. I think the confusion for me comes is when you get multiple characters turn up at the campfire. So for me, I've done like other playthroughs, and say Linda, for example, made it to the campfire. So as you play as Maddie, you do the flashback sequence, you go to the campfire. And I think, was it Maddie and Sam turned up? And the weirdest thing happened is that you turn up to the campfire, Linda's sat there, and it's almost like she has this air of resignation about her. Like, Maddie comes in and she's like, come on, we need to go. We need to carry on running to get away from Frank Stone. And Linda's just sat at the campfire like, no, this is where we need to be. This is where it begins now. You're finally here. And it seems that whoever gets to the campfire first, this is what happens to them. I've seen it with Chris as well. And that's the bit that I didn't get. Is like, why have they suddenly given up when they've got to this campfire? Whereas other characters have turned up and they're like, no, come on, we need to get out of here.
Yeah, no, that is super interesting because I've only ever played it once, so I've only ever seen Linda Sole Survivor where she's at the campfire panicking, talking to the other survivors like, why aren't you talking to me? I've not seen it where you've had a second one there, like, nah, this is us now. So yeah, no, super interesting. Maybe it leads to the whole supernatural and hypnotism angle. Then again, you need the pendant for that. So yeah, comments, we need you again. Please help us.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there we go. And obviously, on a technicality, I don't know. I'm going to say that I had one survivor, even though it said no survivors. Chris was in the 1980s. Obviously, so did you, mate. And that sort of brings the end to the analysis of the game. But before we wrap up, final thoughts. What you thought went well, what didn't go so well, just like a holistic view of the game. Did you enjoy it? Spill.
So yeah, what I want to say as well is that when I play these games, obviously the aim is to keep as many people alive as I can. And I know, for us, we sort of look at it like, oh, we only saved one person. I quite like the beauty of having that unique ending. I was so chuffed. I got my favourite character to the end. And I didn't intend for them to. I just wanted everyone alive. But I just felt like Linda's such a badass. She got the yippee-ki-yay. She shoots Augustine, gets her killed, then comes out. And, maybe I can play her in Dead by Daylight in the future. So, that I really like. In terms of the game, yeah, I really like it. And it's interesting. And we will save it for other videos because, guys, we are going to be doing so many Frank Stone videos afterwards now that we finish this analysis. There's a lot of animosity with the dark endings. And I'll comment more on that, in other videos. But I weirdly like it. I like the beauty of how it links to Dead by Daylight. If you're a non-DBD fan, I'm so intrigued to know if you felt excluded at any point, because it is so Dead by Daylight heavy in there. But yeah, I thought the characters were quirky. I feel like the game learnt from their mistakes from the quarry, and the arcs were wrapped up well. I feel the ending was better. Yes, and the choices as well. There's a lot of branching. The game, that is what we want out of these choice-based games. So I'm really sold. I think Frank Tier is a high tier game for me. I had such a fun time playing it. And there's still, as you can tell by this video, because half of it is just me asking for help in the comments and you, Jack, there's still a lot I have to learn. And I think that's a good symptom. I think that's a good sign where I don't know all the choices. The downfalls from it come maybe from the fact that, like we say, there is a lot of confusion. And I think that is naturally going to happen when you introduce any story that involves timelines, because that is so tough to keep track of. So yeah, there are a lot of questions rather than answers. But in terms of the game and the characters, mate, I love it. Was it better than The Quarry? Yes. Was it better than Until Dawn? Has to sink in. Probably not. That game is lightning in a bottle. But it does do a lot of stuff better than Until Dawn. So, fair play. I've always wanted a game to give Until Dawn a run for its money. And you know what, mate? I'm going to say it. This game doesn't do it, but it comes darn close.
Really? Wow, that is a big call. Couple of things before I go into my sort of overall thoughts on it and that. A couple of things I've learned along the way, because those that have watched this analysis series will have known that as we've been doing the analysis series, I've been doing my second playthrough. So I've been picking, or multiple playthroughs, I've been picking up, oh thank you Bella, I've been picking up on things as I go. So things that I could tell you, mate, potentially that you might not know. The baby in the prologue is Harme. Also, so basically each of the timelines is its own each dimension. I'm assuming that you don't know this. Maybe you do know this. Because I thought that the 60s and the 80s were connected, and then 2024 was its own thing because of the Bonnie thing. But no, looking back, the clues even sort of spell it out, and even there's some interaction between Sam and Linda that gives it away. But if you fail to save the baby in the prologue in the 1960s, then the same Sam from the 1960s is the same Sam from 2024, and he'll tell Linda like, oh, how do you who's this Harmay person, because he doesn't know who Harmay is because the baby died in the prologue. There's lots of, to use the Doctor Who quote, wibbly wobbly timey wimey stuff going on. They're all separate dimensions, and there are still some things that I still don't know about, i.e. why did the film make everyone kick off? Again, comments if you can help with that. As far as overall thoughts goes, I really enjoyed this game. Again, is it as good as Until Dawn? I don't think it quite makes it. Reasons being, as I've said throughout the thing, the locations do get repeated. The biggest negative for me, though, is the fact that the achievement progress was bugged and there were glitches in that sense. The rest of the game was superb, though. I thought the characters were good. A couple of arcs could have been worked on a little bit, but that would be really nitpicky. But the performances were strong. The villain was strong, or villains, I should say. The ending was strong. I think I'm not a DBD player, but as a homage to DBD, I think Supermassive clearly did a brilliant job with the little Easter eggs, the collectibles, the little nods to the game in there, especially with the ending. The plot, okay, it was confusing, but I think again, you replay it, you learn things as you go. And overall, I was really, really impressed. Is it better than The Quarry? I've still got to make my mind up on that one. I'd say it probably is, but not by loads. But I feel like that's because The Quarry has had more time to sink into the canon, whereas maybe I need a bit more time for Frank Stone to sink in. And the puzzles as well. The puzzles were a brilliant feature in this game as well. So, big thumbs up. I come into this game with pretty, I wouldn't say low expectations, but I didn't think it was going to do as well as it did, and I was pleasantly surprised. I think it was actually a really, really good entry, mate.
Yeah, big time. And the last thing I want to say is I'm glad you mentioned it because I forgot to, and I was thinking it as you were speaking. But the puzzles. Supermassive Games put out that survey a while back about what we want to see in the games, and we cried out for puzzles, and I imagine a lot of other people did as well. We asked and they delivered, and it just made the game that much more enjoyable. Like, the downtime wasn't just walking down long hallways, long sort of paths. There was interaction, there were collectibles, not just totems and stuff. We actually had all these different strands and clues to pick up, and it was really enjoyable. Guys, I really want to know in the comments what you thought of this game. Please stay tuned, because that is just the surface. This analysis series was really fun to record, but there's going to be discussion videos, just so much more that I don't really want to give away. But before I pass it over to you to sign out, Jack, I just want to give a massive thank you to Behaviour Interactive again for giving us the beta test for the game. Jack and I haven't had that yet. It was such an honour to have early access to the game. Supermassive Games Behaviour, they're doing everything right. I've got nothing but praise for the two studios, so thank you very much for giving that to us and producing this absolutely epic game. And thank you to you guys for making this far in the analysis.
Yeah, and I echo all of the above there. So thanks again for joining, guys. Drop your comments in the comments section, and do keep an eye out for upcoming videos on Frank Stone. See you in the next one.
Bye guys, see you soon.